From AI investment in Silicon Valley to critical minerals and trade cooperation across South America, President Lee's overseas tour has been centered on securing the building blocks of future industries. For a closer look into all that's been achieved on his trip so far, we're joined by Daniel Connolly, Associate Professor of International Relations at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Connolly, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Professor, President Lee began his trip in San Francisco, where South Korean companies announced around $950 billion worth of AI and semiconductor cooperation with global tech firms. And then he pivoted straight into securing rare earths and lithium deals in South America. So what does that sequencing tell us about how Seoul sees the AI race actually being won? So is this as much a resource security strategy as it is a technology strategy?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, in the previous years, Koreans have often talked about becoming an AI superpower. A lot of the focus was on actually making a sovereign large language model itself. Right now, we see that the field is very much dominated by Chinese and American models like Qwen, Kimi, DeepSeek, Claude, OpenAI. So Korea is necessarily going down the supply chain rather than up. And this is known as a choke point strategy. So if South Korea can produce the semiconductors, secure the raw resources needed to make them, then it will have a very good, strong, secure position in the future of AI. And also important to note is President Lee's San Francisco AI Declaration, which is very much pledging support for U.S. AI infrastructure projects. This suggests that Korea is aiming for a relatively niche role in the U.S. technological stack. So in a sense, giving up the higher end, making the models ourselves, rather being an important part of that process.
Right, and most of what came out of San Francisco were actually corporate agreements. So what role do you think the Lee administration played in, making these deals happen? And does that tell us something about how the government sees its function in Korea's AI strategy going forward?
Right. A lot of these agreements were private sector agreements. And I would say, though, it's important to bear in mind that we're in what some people call a neo-mercantilist age, where state and corporate power are becoming intermixed and interconnected more than ever before. And I think the San Francisco event really exemplified this. You see President Lee meeting with the major heads of U.S. tech companies, such as NVIDIA, kind of even hinting that he would like to be invited out for chicken and beer next time. This is very different than traditional diplomacy, and I would say the Korean state is really trying to demonstrate symbolically that it's putting its weight behind these deals. So it is showing that Korea is a good market for AI and a predictable market. I also think the Korean government is trying to demonstrate to the US leadership especially that even though South Korea wants to become an irreplaceable choke point of the AI industry, it is actually a friendly one to US interests. And that's a delicate balancing act in the age of Trump.
Right, and now turning to South America. So Brazil and Chile both walked away with MOUs in critical minerals, but Chile centered on a 2-decade-old FTA modernization, while Brazil's was built from scratch around new supply chain commitments. So what does that difference in approach tell us about how Korea calibrates its diplomacy country by country, rather than simply just treating the region as a single bloc?
Right, and I think this trip is a really good showcase of maybe Korea's pragmatic diplomacy and its flexibility. By dealing with these countries individually, in bilateral contexts, South Korea is often able to get relatively good deals compared to the traditional multilateral trading negotiations. But I would suggest, though, that there is still a tension in South Korea's dealing with South America. South Korea specifically wants raw resources, minerals, but a lot of these countries want technology transfer from South Korea, industrial transfer from South Korea. And I would say that President Lee kind of tried to find a balance between these two different agendas, but it is still a dilemma in dealings with the continent.
Right, and now looking at the trip as a whole, from AI partnerships in Silicon Valley to critical minerals in Brazil and Chile so far, and the upcoming talks that are to come in Argentina. So what message is President Lee trying to send about South Korea's economic diplomacy? Is this a sign that Seoul is broadening its partnerships beyond its traditional allies while strengthening its position in future industries?
Oh, yes. It was a very, I would say, a positive trip so far. A lot of progress, especially the San Francisco summit. You see South Korea essentially forging deals for South Korean supplies to the US market, but also securing US chips for Korea's own mega AI projects. And similarly in Latin America, you see a lot of flexibility in getting raw resources. So I would say this is still very much a South Korea working within the US alliance system, but maybe pioneering a new elevated role within this technology stack. But I would suggest that we have to be a little cautious about being too celebratory, because at the same time as this kind of progress was being made, we have the debut of China's CXMT Corporation, a semiconductor manufacturer that has caused considerable shocks to the US and Korean stock markets, maybe a sign of future competition. This has also raised concerns about the rather circular AI investments in the US and allied countries. Are they actually going to be profitable? So kind of at the risk of pushing the metaphor too far, President Lee wants South Korea to be the engine of the future AI industry, but we still don't know how profitable or what shape this AI industry will actually take in the years ahead.
All right, Professor, thank you very much for your insights this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you.